Welcome back to the part 2 of Breaking Boundaries, where we are exploring or challenging racism and stereotypes via the sunnah of the Ahlul Bayt, which hopefully, inshallah, we'll get to some of the practices and some of the, not just the lessons, but the actual practice of the Ahlul Bayt. We could say are the sunnah to challenge and deal with this societal cancer that we call in the modern time racism. But I wanted to read something out and see if you could tie it in, Brother Rashid, or get your reflections, not even tie it in, but get your reflections. It's something I discovered traveling on the underground. I literally found this, but I just thought it was intriguing. And it reads, I think J.H. Tilda, MD, which is a famous American medical doctor academic, puts it right when he said, it is exceedingly difficult to secure an honest hearing from any criticism of authority. Established beliefs are well nigh invulnerable because they are accorded infallibility by the masses who are educated to believe that they will be damned for thinking. And because of this, few will tolerate opposition of any nature to anything they have been educated to believe. People who have their thinking done for them are always intolerant.
Bilal, this is where the media comes in handy, because the media trained people's mind to think a certain way. And it's no accident why people are forced, like I say, trained to think, because the media have a specific objective. It's to make people dormant mentally. We will think for you, regardless of what's out there on the internet and so on. Because some people will tell you clear and straight, if it's not on BBC, if it's not on Fox, if it's not on CNN, it's not really news. So if it's on Press TV or RT or some other channel, it's not maybe so authentic. So the media have a role to play, and does play a significant role in shaping the mindset of a lot of people. Their opinions is what matters. The whole 9/11 situation, certain opinions were given by certain stations, and that was
the official narrative.
That what became the official narrative. I mean, if you search the internet and you hear about the whole conspiratorial theories, people would listen to it and they would watch it, but is that really authentic because the BBC and CNN didn't say so? So people are led. And some people really don't know how to reverse that process.
So you mean it's not necessarily what is said is being analysed, but who is saying it?
Exactly. And we need to place ourselves, and one thing I've been advocating for some time now is a Muslim media presence, where the Muslim media across the spectrum, across the satellite spectrum, need to sometimes have a common voice to do the same thing that the other media channels are doing. So when we project, for example, this program, when we project this message tonight, it can be replicated simultaneously among other channels. So the message is synchronized. So the outer media works in a synchronized manner. News are replicated item for item on the BBC and CNN, so it gets around. We are very independent in our approach to things. So the thinking is sporadic. This thinking is broken up. There is no consistency in the message, because we all seem to be fighting internally for audiences. We don't need to be that. We don't need to be that aggressive within ourselves. So in terms of putting a message out there, there is no consistency, because, I mean, for example, this topic tonight, where else could you turn the TV on in the next 24 hours, 48 hours, or 2 weeks and hear this same message replicated? You would struggle to hear that. And this is the level we as Muslims need to be working at. Consistency, collectivization of ideas, and putting it out to the media. So there is a specific agenda. We don't seem to have an agenda from a media perspective. We sit back and we wait until things happen, then we react. We are not proactive. So in relation to the question, yes, is who is saying what carries the sway. And until we raise our status and ourselves and our message to a point where our leaders can endorse, I'm talking about our clerical leaders can endorse exactly what we are saying, endorse it with a stamp, yes. So it becomes a systemizational process between all the networks. It is said on this given day, and let's see what happens until we get to that point of consciousness where our media is served as an educational tool, not just a rhetorical process. We hear regurgitation of stuff over and over. We have to move beyond a regurgitational process. It have to become a process of educating people on specific issues like this tonight. We need to be conscious enough to raise controversial issues and debate them, high-level debates like you have on BBC. And we need to get to the point where the media play a more integral part in our development. Debates, let's have a public debate, invite 50, 60 people. Let somebody host it. These channels can do live broadcasting. We need to show people
You think it's that time? You think it's that time?
The time is now. We need to start intellectualization more and more and more, because people now are very smart. The internet makes things so accessible, and we have to move with the times. I think public debates is something that we as Muslims in the media are really falling. People don't take us seriously. You hear Panorama, you hear other programs, you hear David Dimbleby doing big programs and debates. What are we doing? Bickering among ourselves, or well, he's distant. We need to move beyond that. So until, yes, and the message is tonight, Muslim media need to be more synchronized in our collective approach, our collective message. Okay. That is what we need to be dealing with. That is what we need to be dealing with ASAP. Who speaks is one thing, but what is being said is another thing. But most cases, who says what is being said get heard.
Interesting point. This isn't a debate, but it's a public conversation, so feel free to join us at any point on 0203-515-1234. Ask a question or make a comment, you're more than welcome. What's your thoughts on that statement I read out, or, you know, in terms of
Well, it reminded me
thinking, critical thinking?
Yeah, it reminded me of something I actually heard in a local majlis this year by a visiting sheikh. He referred to the quotation by a European thinker, and I regret I don't recall the thinker's name. Perhaps you know him, where he said that you know who's in authority by what you can't criticize. And that's really been something that's been rolling over in my head since the majlis, especially when it comes to things that are actually socially unhealthily or wrong, but nonetheless people are a bit afraid to criticize. In any case, I do think it is good to have healthy discussions about things that that do need to be discussed.
Can we make room for dissent or divergence, if I can put it that way, from the unspoken orthodoxy? Is there room for that in the community without it being people being cast out or chastised?
If you want my honest answer, I foresee a split. I mean, a bigger split in our community over the next century or so. There will be some people for whom the answer is no, and whatever their, no offense intended, whatever their grandma told them about Islam or about the world or about, outer space and the solar system or whatever is the unquestionable truth. And as long as there's someone out there who endorses it, you don't question it. As long as it's written in a book somewhere, regardless of who wrote it or, whether they had all the brain cells on that day when they wrote it, as long as it's stamped by a publisher, then you don't question it. And, I don't mean to come across as facetious, but, unfortunately, you do see books that they have things that are not correct, not substantiated, accidents, one could say, mistakes by the authors. I don't absolve myself of mistakes either.
Sure.
And of course, a wise and humble person, such as myself, will say, oh, wait a minute, Amina, you made a mistake here or there, so okay, you admit it, you go on with your life. But to some people, there are no mistakes, and this will be the very conservative segment of the community. But I think increasingly also there is a group which does feel we have some, to be colloquial, we've got baggage. We have ideas that are neither Islamic, but by that I mean they're not the will of Allah Ta'ala when He created the universe and the human being. They're not the will of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They're not the will of Ahlul Bayt. They're, what we oftentimes nowadays refer to as cultural.
Yeah.
Now, I don't necessarily
it's
mean
a wide euphemism for a whole load of stuff, though, isn't it? It's not Islam, it's culture.
Yeah. I mean, culture in and of itself is not necessarily
bad.
But what we usually mean by culture is ideas that are somehow oppressive to people or restrictive or difficult or something, things that aren't really necessary, but nonetheless, as you mentioned, do become a sort of unspoken orthodoxy, if you will, even though they really, maybe to certain people's understanding might have nothing to do with what we understand about the will of Allah Ta'ala. And I do find in general that sometimes when I'm getting bogged down by all of these things and asking myself, for example, is it religion or is it culture? It does help for me personally to take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, is Allah the creator of the universe? Would it really make sense that He would be, for example, God forbid, petty about some issue or unfair about some issue? And we believe, of course, the Holy Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them, they speak on behalf of the divine. They're not going to say something that is false or contradictory to the will of Allah. And I find that helps me to put things in perspective. Now, of course, I'm not saying, religiously we're not supposed to use personal opinion and say, well, I think Allah says this and not this. But I'm just saying having this perspective, I think, helps to uplift ourselves sometimes and lift up the discussion. I do think, unfortunately, I don't mean to be all negative here, but I do feel like sometimes as Muslims nowadays, because of the situation we're in this era and the defensiveness we have in our community and so on and so forth, a lot of our discussions tend to be a little bit petty sometimes. And sometimes we're missing the really big issues that are really important. I do think there's going to be there is actually, in fact, a cohort of our community who is really interested in pursuing some new ideas, maybe questioning some things that they received from the previous generation. There are ulama who do that as well.
That can be an academic, or often is an academic process.
Yeah, I mean, of course, to many people, the academic world is different from the Hausa world. It doesn't necessarily need to be. There are people who have one foot in each world. And then there are some people who do see them as being in opposition. But I think the, quote, academic method of research has certain things that can offer, and the traditional Hausa method of research has certain things to offer. Although our community, I think, by and large, will accept things more when they come from the Hausa side.
Yeah, understandably, yeah.
Could I just jump in on that? Because I think a lot of Muslims, I'm talking from the clerical point to the layman, are afraid to think aloud. They are afraid to express their views publicly in certain places for fear of rebuke. I mean, like I said, this program, this particular topic, probably wouldn't get discussed, like I said before, in a majlis, for example. No way. It's not maybe not godly enough. It's too controversial. We alluded to the point earlier. Public forums like majlis should be addressing current and relevant issues and problems of the day, social and political. I have never heard it done. So we need to be moving where a stage where our thinkers are developing the courage to openly say what needs to be said, regardless of reprisals. And I don't think our leaders, certainly our thinkers, are at that level yet. There's still this, maybe I don't want to upset so-and-so. We need to get to a point where majlis are a forum for educating our young people, for reshaping the stagnative process that we have found ourselves in. This is just what needs to happen, because, like I said, it's regurgitation. It's the same thing over and maybe different styles in different places. But in terms of subject matter and subject content, how many people literally go home and remember what was being said? You remember the tears and the emotional outbursts and stuff. But in terms of learning something ideologically driven, do you really get that?
Okay.
Do you really? I don't think you get that. And you made that point earlier.
Well, I think also one of the problems we do face in our community, in some places, maybe many places, is that there is sort of a leaving behind of going to religious gatherings and so on and so forth, if it's not actually dealing with the problems that people are facing day to day, or, like you mentioned, if it is just a bit repetitive, then
You mean you lose a generation, possibly?
You lose the audience. It's not just one generation. And I personally am not actually in favor of focusing primarily on the youth. I mean, they are important. I'm of the view that I do think we actually lose the middle-aged people in our community.
Interesting.
Because we do provide a lot of support to the youth. A lot of lectures are about youth issues, which is interesting till you're about 25, and they're like, okay, another lecture on spouse selection, another lecture on peer pressure, another lecture on why you shouldn't take drugs in high school, etc. So, we've got a lot of youth lectures out there, especially in English. A lot of them are more geared that way. And then we have services that one can say they do appear to appeal to the more elderly portion of the community, or maybe they're just more patient and less picky and they just go for thawab. I don't know. But if you think about it, when people are going through middle-age issues like caring for elderly relatives or parents, child-raising issues, marriage problems, financial problems, health problems, life changes, different life phases, they do need a lot of support. And it's also, I think, a time of life when many people struggle more to involve themselves in the religious community because they have so many commitments. And for me personally, this is actually where I have seen most of my peers, friends, basically go, I would say, go away from the Muslim community, and in some cases, various aspects
It's very
of
insightful.
Islamic
This never heard this
practice.
perspective before.
Even if they were actually quite practicing and interested when they were younger. And I think at some point, what I've heard consistently from people is that they just felt like the community wasn't addressing their needs. Or what I think is really happening from a psychological perspective is not addressing the needs of the different life phases. It's sort of stuck in that youth phase. And where I think our community is stuck to. This is way off topic. Or maybe it's not.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's very right and exact.
Yeah, what I've really come to feel personally is I'd say about 90% of the discussions we have publicly in the Muslim community, in the West at least, maybe also in other countries, are about identity. Now, it might be overt, like us versus them, like why we Muslims are different from people in the West, for example. For example, you mentioned the F word, feminism. They believe in feminism, we don't. So it's a way of drawing us versus them. Now, it might be theological. For example, we may discuss a theological issue where it's understood this is the Shi'i view and it makes us different from them. It may be mantra-based. This is when we say Salat al-Maghrib and they say it some other time. But the point is, whether it's overt or covert, most of our religious discussions serve the main function, as far as I can tell, of delineating identity boundaries, who is included, who is excluded. And the problem with that, now that has a role in religion. I mean, I think you could argue that most religions do that to some degree.
Yep.
Is not dealing with the bigger issues, spirituality, for example, and I mean just pure spirituality, spiritual growth, the position, human condition, the role of the person before Allah Ta'ala. Okay, I'm not saying we don't deal with it, but I'm saying most of that tends to get sidelined, whereas most of us, to my knowledge, psychologically speaking, ideally we kind of deal with the identity thing at the latest by the early 20s. That's not to say we're not dealing with it throughout our lives, especially if you're someone like me who sort of doesn't really fit into any clear boxes. But at some point, your psychology moves on, your life situation moves on, and the dialogue with the community is not moving on. And of course, I was saying this actually may be relevant because issues of ethnicity and religion and ideals about that is very heavily an issue of identity. But the more I've been looking around, the more it's apparent to me that even discussions that in theory don't seem to have anything to do with that, really that is the driving force behind them. And I think that is something that it would be good to be more cognizant about.
Interesting, very interesting and insightful. But I do want to bring it back to criticize, if I may, or be in the position of those that say, Bilal, I hear you speaking about this, Sister Amina, Brother Rashid, but I think you're maybe reading too much into the sacred history about Joan and some of the, you say, stereotypes. I mean, either it's the norm or you're blowing it out of proportion. The impact of a few stories that maybe, we have some challenging accuracies about them. But what are the messages, or what is it? What's the big deal?
There is a saying, Bilal, and I think it is quoted by a popular person, until the color of a man's skin.
Comment. You were about to answer a question.
There is a saying, until the color of a man's eyes is of no more significant than the color of his skin. So we're looking at a situation here where color have played a significant role in molding society the way it is. And we Muslims have fallen victim of that, I think, because we alluded to the whole, what I would call the Aryanization of certain groups of Muslims, where certain people of a certain distinctive color ethnicity have gained prominent positions in the world of Islam, but from a Sunni and Shia perspective. And they have held that position in power based on a particular color program. So how do you address that? So I believe programs like this, which has emerged in opening the doors for discussion academically, is significant, because a lot of people may have not have heard of any other view other than the traditional view, which
so this conversation is maybe giving a different perspective. I'm just going to bring in a caller. Hello and assalamu alaikum, caller. What question or comment would you like to make?
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam.
Comment, please.
No problem. Go ahead. The floor is yours, my sister.
Fantastic topic that you're all talking about.
Thank you.
It's really good that you're talking about it. Because people might have discussed it sort of individually and separately, but not, as the brother said, on the media. So you're brave. But one thing I would like to say from what you're saying, Islam should be showing the whole world what multiculturalism actually is. They all talk about multiculturalism and living this and living that, but Islam actually is it. It's what we should be showing them. And I wonder if you can tell me if you think this is how I'm seeing it right, if it's right or not. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave human beings the laws in which to live by, He didn't tell us you've all got to change your cultures and become Arabian. You're all still whatever culture you are, but you take on the laws. So we can sit around together, eat rice and peas, eat curry, eat fish and chips, all round the same table.
No doubt.
And we're still Muslims. So if that's on a simple level, we can still be our own tribe, our own nationalism, or whatever we are, on a deeper level as well.
Interesting. Would you like to...
I want to pick up on that because it's something I strongly believe in. People need to retain their own identities because, like I said, in both worlds, the Sunni and Shia world, what has happened, the dominant point of view is, and I saw this very much prevalent in the Sunni world, a lot of brothers who became Sunni Muslims wanted to become Arabized. They start behaving and dressing in, they lose the whole cultural identity.
Okay.
It's no more rice and peas. They want to be eating plenty dates. So they lost a whole sense of contact. And that has happened. And I think to a greater extent as well, in the Shia world, a lot of brothers are becoming Persianized. And people need to retain their cultural identity as who they are, eat the cultural foods.
Did you want to just come in again, Sister Yasmin, for a final comment?
Sorry, I was just agreeing with the brother. I think it's really important. But one thing I'd like to say, brother, when I embraced Islam in East London 30 years ago-ish, yeah, in that couple of weeks, the people that embraced with me, there was a Portuguese girl background, there was a Hindu background, there was a Jamaican background, there was an Anglo-Jamaican, and there was an English-Irish Jamaican
Quite a
embracing
diverse,
Islam.
Islam
and
is truly diverse.
Taught us, people that we learned from, was a Pakistani doctor, an intellectual Bosnian sister, a brother and sister who taught us beautiful stuff from Somalia. It was all there. But people were still holding on to their identity.
Alhamdulillah. That's
So
important.
if I can, Jazakallah khair for what you're saying. It's really brilliant.
Afwan. Thank you very much for your comments, sister.
Very important.
Very
because,
important.
Like the sister saying, a lot of brothers and sisters believe they have to give up the cultural identity to become Muslims. You have to act like an Persian. You have to act like an Arab. Says who? And the whole issue of intermarriage, that's a whole other debate in itself. Because people come into Islam expecting to be able to marry somebody of their choice and to be told, well, sorry, out of bounds.
Yeah.
These things create.
As Muslims, we're all equal, but some of us are more equal than others. Is that the
it's a very
idea?
important point the sister brought up.
I mean, I do think one of the problems with respect to the dialogue about Islam today, and I find this in the quote-unquote mainstream media in the UK, like the BBC, for example, or some of the less reputable news organizations such as the Daily Mail or something like the Guardian. It's all across the board, as well as within the Muslim community. We tend to treat Muslim as an ethnicity. So, for example, I might talk about Chinese, Japanese, and Muslims, or Irish, white British, and Muslims. Now, on the one hand, of course, it, I suppose, makes a sort of warm feeling in one's heart to know that we're all so similar to each other, that we're all sort of lumped together as a group. But the problem is, in our community, we treat Islam, or being Muslim, as an ethnicity too. So when there are things that don't mesh, we again have that sort of cognitive dissonance. So for example, you see someone like me at the mosque, so that there's an effort to sort out what are you doing here because you don't fit the Muslim ethnicity. Or if there's Islam being practiced in the West, it's like, well, Islam is ethnically Eastern. And of course this comes from nowhere, but it's a learned idea. So obviously you don't get it out of nowhere, but it's something I wish we were a bit more thoughtful about. Stop and wait a minute. You know, if you look at what we believe, it's entirely the opposite. Islam is a religion. It's not an ethnicity. The Prophet ﷺ, he came for all people, all times. You know, if you believe that, then it doesn't really matter where someone is from. As I often mention to people, you don't see Christians looking at Korean Christians and going, You're a Christian?
Wow.
Are you a real Christian?
Exactly.
You know, they think it's the truth.
Hopefully in part 3 we can go into that a bit deeper, because that's a very important point that has been raised, and hope to hear from you on the other side on 0203 515 1234. Until such time, Assalamu alaikum.